So the first one that we'll get into is using environmental supports, the things in our environment, in our classroom usually, that will help students to know where they're supposed to be, where things go, and some of those items. So first of all, environmental supports are things like classroom structure and organization. So how is the classroom set up and organized to allow students to know where things belong, where they belong? And if you haven't already, we have a classroom setup video on our website. We'll show you where to access those at the end of our time today, but where you can go and get more support with actually the structure and the setup of a classroom. We'll talk about labels for materials and where they belong, where things belong. We'll talk about environmental boundaries. So how can we set boundaries for our students that are visual? So first of all, labeling the environment. Here are a few examples. You can see in the picture on the left, that student is working at the green station, and it's clearly labeled. When he looked at his schedule and saw the green, he knew where to go because it's labeled the same way that his visual schedule was. The picture in the middle is a placemat that students decorated themselves, and they have their name on them. They decorated them with pictures and colors and stickers. And that tells the student when those placemats are set out at snack time, or maybe it's arts and crafts time, whatever it is, that tells the student where they need to be. It also gives them some instructions for where does their plate go and where does their cup go in that example.
I love that picture because it reminds them that their cup goes up to the top and not at the side where it's going to fall off. And we have to kind of teach that because sometimes our kids get excited and distracted at snack time, but that's a good visual reminder to put your cup there and not on the edge of the table.
That's so true. Another reason I really like that is because they didn't have to sit in the same spot every time, but someone could pass out placemats. They could be in a random order, and then students still know where they go, even though it isn't in the same spot every day. It also teaches them some flexibility with not having to have the same spot every day. And then the stop sign on the door is another example of an environmental support. However, as we go through today, we'll talk about how we teach these strategies. Just putting the stop sign on the door did not stop my student from running out of the room, right? My student who was frequently eloping from the classroom. The stop sign itself didn't do the trick, but teaching him what the stop sign meant and positively reinforcing his behavior when he did stop for the stop sign, that's what made the difference in that case. So we'll talk a little bit about teaching these strategies as well. Here are some examples of environmental boundaries that might be familiar to you. You can see the tape on the floor around the student's chair. And I was just talking to a teacher the other day who said, well, we've used blue tape on the floor around his desk so that he can move, but he knows where the boundary is. He knows where he can go, which I think is a great strategy for our students. It's very visual, gives them kind of that environmental boundary that they can stick to. We've got the rugs on the floor, and that might be at a circle time area or a small group kind of style of teaching. I don't know if y'all remember the carpet squares from several years ago now, where we had our little carpet remnant. We took it to the floor where we were sitting to listen to a story or for some small group time. And that told us where we were supposed to be, right? Like your body was supposed to be on the carpet square, not on your friend's carpet square, not in the floor next to you, not on your friend. Yes. So that's an example of an environmental boundary. And then the lineup, these are circles. Sometimes you might see footprints on the floor or different shapes. Sometimes teachers will use letters or numbers, but just something to show students where they should be when it's time to line up. And then on the desk, there's an example with tape, just to kind of separate out and indicate where each student's work area is. And I feel like we've seen that quite a bit with COVID, even more obvious physical boundaries like the plexiglass and some of those things that some people have used are another example of environmental boundaries. So like I said, just putting the boundary in place isn't what does the trick or isn't what helps us out. It's taking the time to teach it. So we do have to take time to stop and teach these strategies. That was one thing when I first started the beginning of my career. I didn't value taking the time to teach some of these strategies because I didn't understand how important they were. And I felt like it was taking time away from teaching academics, which in reality, once I stopped and slowed down and took the time to teach these strategies, then I could get further into academics. And it opened doors for my students and for me as a teacher. We can use positive reinforcement, and we should use positive reinforcement to teach these strategies. The example I gave earlier with the stop sign on the door, we would practice with students, might walk up to come with me. And we walk up to the stop sign, stop. Oh, great job stopping, high five, maybe give them an M&M or a Skittle, something small as reinforcement, and really kind of celebrate that, have a little party there at the stop sign every time they stopped. And at first they were doing it with an adult, and then we'd kind of back off a little bit and see if they would stop on their own, and then have them practice independently while we're still really reinforcing that skill. And there would be times where they would go to the stop sign and stop and say, look, Mrs. Magson, I stopped. And so then I'm over there, high five, Skittles, whatever the party needed to be for that student, to really reinforce them using those boundaries. And then modeling is really important, showing them what we want them to do, like in the example I just gave you, but also modeling where things go, and not just for our students, but for our paras also. So if I have a nice shelf like the one you can see on the screen labeled, and I use the markers off the shelf, I want to be sure that I'm modeling putting them back there when I'm finished, so that other people will do the same thing. And then being consistent is so important. Just remembering that we have to be consistent with all of these things, with taking the time to teach, even with positive reinforcement, with modeling them, and not giving up quickly, but doing the same thing over and over so that everyone gets it. You can see on the screen, I love this example, and it's kind of dark, but it's the best picture I've got right now. It's of an easel with kind of a first we work, then we can come play in this area. And there's a stop sign when that area is closed. So I love that idea of having that visual support for this is closed right now. And when that's removed, then that's a place where they can go.
I love all these examples that you've given, because it really is the foundation and the structure that your classroom needs in order to run smoothly, so you can do the academics.
Teaching, yeah.
Because if these environmental supports are not in place, you're going to be leaving your teaching session to go get a kid and redirect and move them, or go get a kid and remind them that they've got to put their stuff up before they transition. And that just takes time away from your instruction. So like you said, taking the time to teach this stuff's really powerful structure for your classroom.
I'm also thinking just now, as Rebecca's talking, I mentioned that classroom setup video that's on our website earlier. So that was the August video. The September video was zoning plans?
Data binders.
Sorry, I'm getting out of order. I'm trying to build on each other. So first we set up the classroom, then data binders, looking at student data and what do our students need before we move into setting up the zoning plan, using your classroom setup to create the zoning plan. I'm stumbling over my words, but hopefully y'all get where I'm going. We're taking steps to build on those foundation pieces, and visual supports are kind of like the next layer. It's like that next piece of the foundation that we're going to be able to use for everything we do after this as well. Another example you can see at the top picture on that page is the picture of like an independent workstation set up with the visual boundaries or the environmental boundaries are those dividers that you can see, separating out that space and showing students where they need to work.
Yeah, it looks like there might even be a visual for expected behavior in that area, what the student's supposed to do first, next, then. So you can see those environmental supports create the system that the student works through.
Absolutely. So then one important thing, these are some tips and tricks. One important thing is to label the picture with the picture and the word, not just the picture. Even if our students aren't readers yet, we're going with the presumption that someday they will be, and we want to provide them that text also. And then reduce the clutter. Whatever we're doing in our classroom, we want to be sure that we're reducing the clutter and we don't have too much for them to visually sort out. We want to keep it simple. So whatever visual strategies we're using, we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible so that we're not being confusing with the things we're asking them to do. And then we're going to consider specific student needs. So as we go through today, you might think, oh, that strategy would work really well for this student, maybe even for a specific task or a specific time of the day. But it might not be a strategy that another student needs or that meets their needs. And you can see some other examples of labels and using environmental boundaries as we in this picture.